I would just like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. For those new to this group, this evening we are pleased to welcome back Christine McMillan. Christine has been serving our community for over 20 years and has provided families in our community a safe place to mourn their loss and has supported them on their journey through their grief. Tonight you may hear something that resonates with you or an area of your grief that you wish to explore. Please know Christine offers private, one-on-one counseling that is often covered by your health insurance. Please feel free to take a card and contact her directly to schedule an appointment. Once again, we welcome you tonight, and we look around this room. One thing that immediately resonates is that we are not alone. You are here because you have experienced the loss of your spouse, but you are also here because you loved deeply. And love is the greatest gift of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan. And thank you to the Families First team that continues to bring this wonderful service to our community. I truly believe Windsorites are truly lucky. So thank you for coming here. Thank you for those of you who are joining us on live stream. Death is not an easy topic to talk about. Painful, emotional topics, we don't gather and talk about it. So I do appreciate you making the effort to come out tonight. And I hope that you leave with some form of hope. Even if you don't feel it right now, I hope that you tuck it in the back of your head that you can get through this. So we'll be here for a little over an hour and a half, depending on how talkative everybody is. And feel free to look after yourself and do whatever you need to do during this time. If you need to get up and stretch your legs, get a breath of fresh air, use the facilities, I will not be offended at all. You can ask me questions at any point in time. However, I will note that this is not a support group, but certainly if you have any questions about the content of my presentation, I'd be more than happy to review anything or clarify for you. Okay, so if you do have cell phones, we're going to put it on mute, because I know it's part of our lives now, and sometimes we forget. So I'd just like you to take a deep breath and kind of get centered for this time together. And as I said, please do whatever you need to do to look after yourself. There's some seats up here, right up in front, if you don't mind coming up here. Okay. The death of a life partner potentially can affect all facets of your life. Even if you were fairly independent or interdependent in your relationship, you might be surprised at how their death can throw you off balance. It's as if you're not tethered anymore. You don't have your anchor. You've not only lost the physical presence of your person, you've lost their companionship, you've lost the rhythm of your life, the fabric of your life, the structure of your life. The death of a partner is considered the #1 stressor on a very well-known life stress scale. So the journey ahead of you, or some of you depending on the death of your loved one, wherever you might be in the journey, is not easy. But it can be done. So tonight I'm going to talk very generally, because although I know some of you in the audience, I don't know all of you. I don't know specifics. I don't know how long you were together. I don't know if you're raising children. I don't know if you're an empty nester. I don't know the state of your partnership, your marriage. I don't know how your loved one died. And all of those factors are going to make your grief journey a little unique. even though, as Logan said, as you look around the room, you are not alone. We know that in our heads, but certainly when we're home, we feel like we're alone. So this will be a general overview, and if there's anything specific that you would like to investigate, delve further into, certainly come in and chat with me. Okay? The confirmed bachelor C.S. Lewis, the famous writer who married very late in life, after his beloved wife died of cancer, he said, "Bereavement is a universal and integral part of our experience of love. It follows marriage as normally as marriage follows courtship, or as autumn follows summer." You are here and you are all bereaved. I'm going to use the term grief, but grief is a very general term, and it can be used to anything where we've lost something of value. You are actually bereaved because you've been robbed of someone's physical presence. You're here because of a death. But that's not well known, so I will use the term grief and grieving. And the reason you're all here is because of one very basic, universally accepted concept, and that's attachment. It's a primitive and biological instinct to attach to others so that we get our needs met. So if you think of an infant, they attach to their caregivers. And that's because they need caregivers to provide them with safety, security, and their basic needs. That relationship that we have with our primary caregivers forms a template to which we subconsciously then go on and attract people into our lives. So I'm very much based what I call an attachment basis. My work is based on attachment. So when I have a client who's grieving, I want to know a little bit about their history, because that informs how you're going to get through this grief. That tells me a lot about your attachment in your partnership. So obviously, as adults, we don't need other people to keep us safe. But we're talking about emotional safety. We're talking about keeping the world safe, giving us meaning. And you have called your life partner into your life. So that attachment is your choice. And you're here because that attachment is broken. And think about infants. When they're deprived of their caregivers, when they're separated from their caregivers, they protest, don't they? So C.S. Lewis also says, always remember the pain now is part of the joy then. So what is this thing we call grief? It's a simple 5-letter word to describe separation anxiety. That's all it is. You are protesting the fact that your loved one is no longer here. And separation anxiety is actually a stress response, because grief is stressful, as I said. And the death of a loved one is rated number 1 on the stress scale. And grief does really strange things to our bodies and our minds and our souls. It's also highly personal as well as universal. So if you have the capacity to attach, you will experience grief when your loved one is no longer available to you. It is also a normal and natural process. So if you leave with anything tonight, is know that whatever you're feeling, and we'll talk about that very shortly, and whatever you're experiencing is normal. This is not going to be your new normal. This is our protest. This is the period of adjustment that our bodies, our minds, and our souls have to go through to adjust to the reality. So let's have a look on the next slide. What are normal and very common grief responses? This is good grief. This is normal grief, believe it or not. So one of the things you've got to learn is how to be okay with feeling this way right now. You're not going crazy. It's not always going to be this way if you do the work that we call grief work. Anybody experienced any of these? In some portion, at some level? Oh, there's somebody who's willing to put up her hand. Somebody nodded here, put up their hand. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Exactly. Now you don't have to experience all of them, particularly anger, which you've probably been told you have to experience because it's a stage you have to go through. But you know what? There are no stages. It comes at you like this. And that's the reason that I set up the slide this way. Things coming at you without your permission. It can affect appetite. It can affect how we think. So you're not going crazy if you've forgotten your telephone number or how to get from point A to point B. So if we take these effects of grief, I don't even want to say symptoms, outcomes of grief, okay? Acute grieving, early in the process. If we take these and we categorize them, we're looking really at 5 domains. This is how it can play havoc with your life. So we know about the emotions. So whether you show it externally, you're feeling it. So anger, sadness, resentment, loneliness, guilt, regret, longing, any and all of those. Again, not all of those have to be part of your experience. And then it affects us physically because grief is stress. Think about where you hold your stress. What parts of your body? How does it come out? So appetite, sleeping patterns are affected, heart palpitations, headaches, chronic conditions are exacerbated. Fatigue, and then also the opposite end of the scale, extreme restlessness, a lot of energy that has to be expressed. You don't know what to do with yourself. And then the next moment you're exhausted. Or you haven't done anything and you're still exhausted at the end of the day. It can also affect the mind. Because when we're emotionally dysregulated or we're a little bit more emotional than usual, we can't think. It takes this offline. It stops the information going up to your cortex. So that's why we recommend not making any major decisions. Because most decisions are probably going to be a reaction based on how you're feeling right now. So your concentration could be affected, your memory, decision making. And that's really unnerving because all of us in this room are pretty capable people. We were leading our lives just fine. We didn't have, it's okay, come on in, have a seat. So this especially throws people off. So when my clients remember that they have an appointment with me, I think that's marvelous. And if they happen to forget the time or the day, I understand why. And also, grief is trying to get your attention. So you don't have a lot of space, you don't have a lot of bandwidth for things like the bills that have to be paid, or you have to return someone's call. So please be patient with yourself. Don't add additional stress. I call it grief brain, okay? It affects us socially. We feel out of sorts. We're now one of two. You may or may not be invited to gatherings with your other coupled friends. Or you may be invited and you don't want to go. Or you may be invited and you go and you feel out of sorts. Other people may not understand what you're going through. You can be highly sensitive, very disappointed in people that you thought would be there for you. That's a very common experience. All those people who said they'd be there for you, just give me a call if you need me. You may isolate because you don't want to be around people. Or you may find yourself very clingy, feeling very afraid, going back to that primitive biological urge to be with somebody else in order to feel safe. And lastly, it affects us on what we call a spiritual realm. And I'm not referring to religion. It could refer to religion if that's part of your life, but I'm talking about, now what? Why did this happen? Why him? Why her? Why now? How do I go on? Do I really want to go on? So actually, all of the outcomes that was on the last screen is normal. Anything that you experience is normal, with the exception of wanting to harm yourself or anyone else. Now, very often I will hear from my clients who are bereaved spouses, I don't necessarily care if I don't get up tomorrow. That's not a suicide, that's not suicidal ideation. That's just telling me that they've been affected on a spiritual realm. The meaning in my life is gone, the purpose in my life. Any questions about any of that? Anything that you've experienced that I may not have mentioned? So understand, grief is going to affect you like the waves in the ocean, like a roller coaster. There's no stages, there's no phases. There's no beginning and end to a feeling. You will keep revisiting feelings and thoughts as needed until they've lost their emotional charge. And the only way to do that is to process it, is to attack it, is to look at it, not to avoid it. Hi.
In the social aspect,
Yep.
I find that, like you say, to go to events and things like that. But I actually find that when you do go, and if it's all couples, you just don't seem to fit in like you used to.
And that's very true. That is true. Again, depending on the situation, depending on how well you know these people, and the relationship with these couples beforehand will tell me a lot about, whether or not you feel comfortable or not. One of my spouses very early on in my career belonged to a very tight-knit group of people, and when her husband died, she kept getting invited to go out and socialize with them, and she did, because it didn't feel like they were coupling up. So if they went out to a restaurant, the couples didn't sit next to one another. They were interspersed. So those things make a difference. So if you're in a social situation with couples, do the couples mingle or do they stay together? So a lot depends on who these people are and what the relationship was like previously. Maybe they did stick together, but you didn't notice because you had your life partner. Okay? So maybe grief is our response to an unfinished story. You didn't get to finish your story. And you're protesting. Your heart and your head and your mind and your body is protesting. That's natural. That's not abnormal. So, what makes your grief experience unique? These are the things I look out for to determine what the obstacles are, what the risk factors are for, say, complicated grief or prolonged grief, and certainly what the protective factors are. So I want to know, who was this person? Now I know that everyone here has lost a life partner, but tell me about him or her. What was the meaning of the relationship to you? What were the circumstances surrounding their death? Was it quick? Was it sudden? Was it protracted after a long illness? Were they just diagnosed and then died shortly after, which I would consider a sudden death, so I would look for something very different. Was it a conflicted relationship? All of these things are going to impact how you grieve their death. Who's in your lifeboat? Who's in your support system? Okay? Do they show up? Conversely, do you ask for help? Are you willing? Are you humble enough to say, hey, I could use a friend right now, or I could use somebody to come and shovel my drive, or pick up the laundry, or drive the kids to baseball practice? Very closely connected is your cultural, ethnic background as well as your belief system. Sometimes our belief system, our cultural impact is very strong, but how we experience our grief and how we're processing it conflicts with that. And that creates an internal conflict as well. Well, I should be doing this, this, and this, but I don't believe I want to do it. So all of those things have to be explored. And it's going to create more tension in your grief experience as well. Biological sex makes a difference as well. Generally speaking, females tend to be what we call emotive grievers. They show their grief. Males tend to keep it internally. Generally speaking, it's what we call, they're called what we call instrumental grievers. They rather do things to work their grief out. Neither one is right or wrong, it just is. But we also have socialized males to be strong, to keep things inside. Your age will play a factor as well. What are you currently dealing with? Do you have any physical health problems? Are you bringing any type of mental health issues into the grief process? That's going to impact how you deal with this stress. What other stressors are going on? Did the death of your loved one create financial issues? Do you have to sell your home? Do you have to move? And this is really most important, because this is something I can't change, is how do you look at life? Are you basically an optimistic person? Doesn't mean you're not sad and you're not protesting their death, but are you basically an optimistic person? Do you know that life can be good, but it can also be painful? Is the glass half empty or half full? Can you hold your sadness and still be grateful at the same time? That's critical. If I see that a person can do that, their chances of getting through this grief process is much better. So for some, the grief process can be very intense. And for others, it can be rather mild. And it depends on these things that shape your grief. Were you there when your loved one died? Was it tragic? Were you holding their hand? Were you expecting it? Not that that makes it any less painful. And for some, the process starts immediately, and for others, the process is delayed a little bit. It could start several months later. So although I asked date of death, I really want to know, when does your grief work start? Have you put it off for the last 6 months? What brings you to call me now? Certainly if someone calls me a year later, 2 years later, I'm curious. I want to know what's been happening in your life. Maybe you had kids and you were busy raising them. I remember a client many years ago who contacted me about 2 years after the death of her husband. And I said, what brings you now to seek help? And she said, well, all my friends are telling me I've got to seek help. I'm angry. I said, okay. I said, so what's been happening in these last 2 years? And she told me her young son was suffering from cancer. Legitimate reason to put her grief on the back burner. But there were consequences of that. All that grief was building up over the last 2 years. But she had practical reasons to put it aside. Any questions about that? So the question then becomes, your life partner has died, and we've all agreed you're grieving in some form, to some degree, but are you mourning? This is the grief work I'm talking about. This is what you have to do. Time, in and of itself, is not going to make things better. So what's mourning? It's how I take those feelings, those thoughts, the excess energy in my body, and how do I externalize it? How do I release it? It's grief gone public, according to Dr. Alan Wolfeld. And this is the process where we slowly adjust and adapt to their absence. So you protest, you stamp your feet, you hold your breath, you do whatever you need to do. You release it, you don't keep it in. Because what happens when you keep it in, time goes by, but it's still there and it freezes inside of you. And it makes your journey forward even more difficult, if not impossible, to live a full life. The problem with mourning in our society is we're a mourning avoiding culture. Right, Pat? We were just talking about it. 6 months. You should be better by now. Why does it still hurt? That's because our culture is mourning avoiding. There are far healthier cultures around the globe who don't necessarily welcome this pain, but understand it's part of living. Understand it's part of the rhythm of life. But what we want to do is we want to pack it in a nice box with a bow and put it on the shelf. Take down the pictures. Get rid of their clothing. I'm not going to bring up his or her name because I don't want to make you sad. Well, you know what? I am sad. And I'd like to talk about them. I'd like to hear their name, even if I cry. So you are actually going against the tidal wave when it comes to mourning. So when you find your support system, you find people who allow you to mourn and don't judge you for it. Don't push and pull you through the process. But yet we tell everyone, don't feel, don't talk, don't trust, don't think for yourself. And so what happens is we start engaging in these behaviors. We keep busy. We work excessively. We jump into volunteer work. We babysit the grandkids. No, I can't come to that, I can't make that meeting or that grief group meeting because I'm babysitting the grandkids. So this is avoidance. These are avoidance behaviors. Now, some avoidance is natural because intrinsically we don't want to feel pain. We learned the first time we put our hand over a hot stove. And so we withdraw. We avoid. But this is the kind of pain that we cannot avoid. We can't outrun. It will catch up to you. I was chatting with a client today, and her life partner recently died. And she's got a young son, and she said, I took down all of his pictures because it was making my son cry. She goes, I know, I probably shouldn't have done that. And she says, then I took my son out for an event in the community. And she said, I happened to glance over my shoulder and I thought I saw my husband. And my heart stopped. And my son noticed it too, the resemblance. So there will always be triggers. You can maybe control the triggers in your immediate space, but you can't control the triggers when you go out into the world. And so that's what I mean about the work, the feelings, the painful feelings. Because once we engage in them, our hearts get adjusted to it. And it doesn't throw it. Otherwise, you're going to be walking through minefields the rest of your life. Any other mourning avoiding behaviors? Anybody courageous enough to share that they've engaged in? You can say it anonymously. I won't mention your name. But do you recognize any behaviors in yourself? Keeping busy, volunteering, getting rid of possessions, urge to find another life partner. If you are courageous enough to do your mourning, we know that there are certain personality factors that will increase the chances of you having a good outcome, getting through this process, happy and intact. And that is having a sense of oneself as caring and capable. Now, you may not feel that at this very moment if you're deep in your grief, but how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a good person? So really good self-esteem. You don't have any major regrets from the relationship. Well, we all have regrets. You don't have any major regrets that you haven't worked on. You were a responsible person in the relationship. You were content in the relationship. Again, not a perfect relationship, but you knew that this was your life partner, no matter what the trials and tribulations were. This was the person you were meant to be with. So really we're looking at, there was no ambivalence in the relationship when they were alive. Are you able to tolerate your sadness and your pain, or do you avoid it? Can you remember your loved one? and even at times smile and laugh. And are you willing to ask and accept offers of help? Because we cannot do this alone. It's not meant to do it alone. In days gone by, the community helped, right? They brought the casseroles. They cut your grass. They looked after the children. The faith community helped. They had outreach programs. We got through it together. Even though they may not have experienced a death similar to the person's experience, there was this compassion that we'll get through it together. But more so in our society, we live very independent lives. Jo says, she was not only my wife, but she was also the one who would tell me if my socks matched, if my tie was straight, or if my hair was combed. She was able to tell me with one look if I was talking too much or saying something stupid. She was the one who would remember all the birthdays and special occasions, and all I had to do was sign the cards. She was good at all things I was not good at. So she complimented me and made me more whole. God, I miss her so much. I feel like part of me is missing. My parents were married almost 47 years when my mom died, several years ago, at which actually it's going to be 16 years this month. And one of the things I remember him saying was, I wish we had made it to 50. And he also said, I've lost my social convener. I've lost the person who, looked after all those things. I turned up. But in the 16 years, he has remembered birthdays and anniversaries and graduation dates. And he'll be 90 this year. So I know it's possible. But we don't take on the roles quickly and easily. Any questions? Comments? Anything you disagree with? No? So I'm going to talk about some themes right now that we see with spousal loss. And the first one is, who am I now? So we take those vows, or we make that commitment, and we never think about the end date. We know, we say, until death do us part, but we don't give it much consideration, and we're never prepared for it. And initially it might seem just unimaginable. Now what do I do? How do I go on? I feel out of sorts, unbalanced. And then the world doesn't feel safe, again, emotionally safe. Because the world doesn't, you're looking at the world through different lenses. And so we, through the mourning process, through the grief work, very slowly, you have to work from we to me. So in very practical terms, it might look something like, well, we would have done this summer. And then eventually, I've decided I'm going to sell the boat and I'm going to travel. Or I'm going to buy a new summer trailer. Or I'm going to sell the cottage because she or he loved the cottage and I'm not up to it right now. So then the decisions then are based on what it is that are more appropriate for me right now as not being part of a dyad. But that's very difficult to move from that, from we to me. How many of you still say our house? Yeah, our house. And as an adult who's lost a parent in adulthood, it took me a while to say, Mom and Dad's house to Dad's house. So these changes don't occur quickly just because our brains know. Our hearts are reluctant. It takes a long time for our hearts to catch up and know what our heads knew all along. So that identity doesn't come quickly, even if you have a good sense of who you are. Because the people we call into our lives become mirrors, right? They reflect our dreams, our wishes. We call people into our lives as friends that are like-minded. They help us form part of our identity. We feel good when we're with them. They add value to our lives. And so this process of moving from we to me is a struggle for a lot of people. And the process may take years. Not that it happens in 5 years. The process may take longer, where you truly feel one is a whole number. And then there's loneliness. So either if you're living alone, if you're an empty nester, or you're living without your partner, but you've got children at home, loneliness is very common, and it does last a while as well. Loneliness basically is a state of distress or discomfort that results when you perceive a gap between what your needs are and what's actually happening. So I need to be around people, but there's nobody here. So I'm most likely going to experience then being lonely. Because you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely for that person, correct? You can be with your children, your grandchildren, and still be lonely for that one person, right? It's an odd feeling, isn't it? It's not uncommon for people to say, or especially adult children to say, well, you've got us. Does anyone experience that? With adult children saying, but Mom, but Dad, you've got us. And that's true. My father has us, but he doesn't have his partner. So there's two types of loneliness after an intimate partner death. The first is emotional or intimate loneliness. And that's the loneliness that you are all experiencing in this room because your life partner is no longer here. They're the one who gave your life meaning. They're the one who gave you a sense of belonging. They're the ones that you were attached to. They provided a sense of security. Not likely to be able to replace this unless you find another life partner. And I'm not suggesting that, believe me. I just want to make sure that you understand the difference between emotional loneliness and social loneliness. So this comes part and parcel of a spousal loss. I hear this continuously. I'm so lonely. Basically, that person is saying, I've lost a leg and I'm off balance. Yes. Social loneliness, or what we call relationship loneliness, is the people that you surround yourself with. So these are relationships that provide us with opportunities to discuss mutual interests, enjoy events together, exchange ideas, engage in social events. So they might be your group of married friends. or maybe your co-workers, or maybe your neighbors. This you do have some control over. If you are constantly saying no to invitations, you will experience social loneliness then. And that's within your control. Again, not a substitute, certainly not a substitute for emotional loneliness, but it keeps connections, and that's important because we don't want anyone to start self-isolating. That's a slippery slope. A widow that I worked with, I saw her many years after, and she said, "I'm living alone, but I'm not lonely." So the level of loneliness that you experience, whether social or emotional, will depend on how comfortable you are with your own company as well. Are you comfortable being by yourself? Do you like your company? Do you like your solitude? But it has to be both. It has to be solitude, your own company, because you can't be with people all the time, plus stepping outside of your comfort zone and continuing to engage with people, because the invitations will stop. So bereavement is really the process of learning to live in the presence of their absence. Just because your head knows it doesn't mean your heart does. Alan Wolfell says that loss creates a barren present, as if one were sailing on a sea of vast nothingness. Those who suffer loss live suspended between a past for which they long and a future for which they hope. So this period of suspension I call mourning. So from the date of their death to some time in the future, you are mourning and working on finding that new normal. Who am I now? How do I engage in life? How do I still live? Additionally, after a death, you don't just experience one type of loss. There's a real loss, which is the physical presence of your person, the companionship, the physical and emotional intimacy that they brought to the dance of your life. But there's also symbolic or secondary losses. Loss of future dreams, events that they'll never attend, birthdays, anniversaries, graduation, births. Maybe you've lost your co-parent or your co-grandparent. Maybe you've lost your travel partner, your chef, your household manager, your snow shoveler, your toilet fixer, the person who bought the birthday cards, the person who did the homework with the kids, the person who organized the trips, your dance partner. These are secondary or symbolic losses. So are you beginning to understand that it's not a matter of weeks or months that we adjust to this easily? At the very beginning of the process, we're in a state of shock, so we look after all the details that have to be done, the legal estate matters. Once that shock and numbness have worn off, that's when the mourning should start. The grief starts then. And we start to realize the many losses that we've experienced. Joe talked about the secondary losses, right? The person who put his outfits together, who bought the cards, part of him died too. The person who monitored him in social occasions. Sheryl Sandberg I think she was the CEO of Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, and her husband died suddenly of a cardiac event. She says, in her book, Option B, she says, for months, no matter what I did, I felt the debilitating anguish would always be there. Most people I know who had lived through tragedy said that over time, the sadness subsides. They assured me that one day I would think of Dave and smile. I didn't believe them. When my children cried, I would flash forward to their entire lives without a father. The fear of forever without Dave was paralyzing. It seemed clear that my children and I would never have another moment of pure joy again. Never. Not unusual at the beginning of a grief process to think in terms of never. And if I can get my clients to say, not now, then that's progress. Well, I'm not going to do that now. It doesn't make sense for me to do it now. We don't want to think of in terms of never. I'll never be happy again. But this is also understandable. So, check in with yourself. Do you think in terms of never? And then you've got to make adjustments. You make external adjustments, internal adjustments, and spiritual adjustments as well. So external adjustments really speaks to things that affect your everyday functioning. So what kinds of things, what roles did they have in your life? Did they take the garbage out and now you have to do that? Now do you have to, take the taxes to the accountant or renegotiate the mortgage or buy birthday presents or Christmas presents? Those are external adjustments. Things that have to get done. And these adjustments we take on very reluctantly. Not because we're not good at them. Why? Because of why we have to take them on. I tell this story a lot. I had a client who lived in my neighborhood, and we take our garbage out to the alley in the back. And she said that was George's job. To take the garbage out. Well, she was fully capable of doing it, but every time she took the garbage out after George died, she counted because she didn't want to do it. She was angry, she was protesting. And then she moved out of the neighborhood and we ran into one another several years later, and she said, Christine, I've stopped counting. It's now my job to take the garbage out. So it's not because we can't do it, it's because why we have to do it. Those external adjustments. Internal adjustments are related to what we talked about earlier, self-identity. Who am I now? How do I go on? How do I see the world? Am I enough? Affects your self-esteem, your sense of self-efficacy as well. And then there's spiritual adjustments. And those are, again, we talked about it a little previously. How has it affected your sense of how you see the world? Do you see the world as fair or cruel or unjust? It challenges what we call your assumptive world. Do you believe or do you assume that only good things happen to good people and sad things happen to bad people? That's your assumptive world. These are assumptions that we just have, we carry with us, and they're challenged when something painful happens in our life. So you also have to look at the world differently. It's going to challenge your beliefs, your outlook. You've got two choices when you get through this process: bitter or better. You can be bitter at the beginning of the process, because that's part of your protest. But if you haven't done your mourning and your grief work, your chances of ending up somebody who's bitter are much higher. I accept that I cannot control the fact that I have suffered loss, but I can control what I am going to do with the life that I have been handed. Whatever I decide to do or try, I will do so with the understanding that my exploring new opportunities and experiences, I'm not casting aspersion or disrespecting my past. I am actually taking control of a situation over which I may have had little or no control by honoring my past without living in my past, welcoming today and designing my destiny, and embracing a future of my choosing. Now, if you are new in the grief process, and I'm not talking just weeks, if you're new in the grief process, you're not going to see yourself in this slide. And that's okay. I'm not telling you that's where you have to be. These presentations are about hope, providing you hope, helping you to build your resilience. So if you do the hard work of grieving and mourning, you will get to this part where we give up the protest and we start to redefine ourselves and create a life that's more suitable to the present. So I've already mentioned this, you must do your mourning, because what mourning does, it transforms the acute, difficult, painful, never-ending grief into what we call integrated grief. This is the grief that we can live with fully. This is the grief that you can talk about your loved one and smile and laugh. This is the grief that opens up your heart. This is the grief that welcomes life. This is the grief that you can take forward with you, because you will always in some form be grieving, because there is no finish line to love. But it's a grief that we can live with fully. So once we've done our mourning, we realize that we can't have their physical presence back with us. And so what we try to do is establish a different kind of connection with our loved one, and it's called a continuing bond. How am I going to remember my loved one as I put one step in front of the other? How do I take elements of what they brought to my life forward with me? And that's going to be individual for each one of you. And it just becomes part of your life, like brushing your teeth. It just becomes normal. Today's Dad's Day, or Mom's Day, or Bob's Day. But it's not your focus, and when you experience that, it's not out of pain any longer. So this is an internal adjustment. And then you've got to develop a new sense of yourself, the me part. You don't make decisions based on what could have been, because it's not relevant to now. So that's an internal adjustment. This is an external adjustment. Am I going to take up new activities? Am I going to move? I had a widow, married many, many years, and she said her husband had worked for one of the big three when we had the big three in Windsor. And she said every year when it was, or every time when it was time to buy a new vehicle, he'd ask me to go, but I'd go, but I knew he would choose his vehicle, his color, you know, the bells and whistles that he wanted, but I'd go because I wanted to support him. So when it came time to purchase a vehicle after he died, she said, I was petrified. She says, but I knew I had to do it. So I did my research, I consulted people in my family, I went and bought the car I wanted, the model I wanted, the color I wanted, and all the bells and whistles that I wanted. And then I drove to Toronto to visit friends by myself. That wasn't part of her life before. Then I had another widow who was also married for many, many, many years, had grandchildren. And I said to her, what is something that you've always wanted to do that you never got a chance to do because you became a wife and a mother and a grandmother? And she said, are you ready for this? I've always wanted to skydive. Yeah. But she wanted to do that. I said, really? Why? She goes, I don't know. It always seemed fascinating. She says, and one of my grandsons is learning how to skydive. So I thought maybe I could go on whatever you call it. You don't go alone. You go with somebody else. I don't know what the terminology is. So I discharged her from the program, and I said, would you do me a favor and call me when you make your first jump? And she called me and she left me a message, and she said she jumped from the plane with her grandson. So we don't know. We don't know what we're capable of. We don't know what could bring us some joy. So find new people, objects, pursuits that you're willing and you want to put your emotional investment in, your time, your energy. What is something that gives maybe you now new purpose and meaning? How can you still continue to contribute and feel good about yourself? Mickey Martinez was the kind of husband many women dream about. He loved grocery shopping and did it weekly at a nearby supermarket, took care of household repairs, washed dishes, and was always ready with a broom and vacuum when needed. But after he died, Mary Alice, his wife of 37 years, found herself paralyzed in the supermarket the first time she tried to go shopping. 6 months later, when preparing her traditional Christmas Eve dinner for 12, she cried out in frustration as she tried to cook, clean, and set up for company on her own. Mickey, where are you when I need you? But Mary Alice soon learned to shop. Guests now contribute to the annual dinner, and hired workers do the needed repairs in her century-old Brooklyn home. And without a husband who had told her no more pets, she now enjoys the company of a cat and dog. So, hold on to a little hope. So here's some signs that you may be progressing in your grief. best thing you can do is to do your mourning and live fully in honor of your partner, your life partner. Alan Wolfeld says, if you loved well, you must mourn well in order to go on and live well. But there's that mourning piece right in the middle that we have to go through. And I'm going to end with this. I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with you, and I realized you spend the rest of my life, your life with me. They died loving you. Don't forget that. I thank you for coming out here tonight, for being courageous enough to engage in your pain. I wish you the well in your journey. Remember, you don't have to do it alone. I wish you all the best. Any questions, comments, anything you'd like me to clarify?
My husband died at the house, and I'll be very tired. And I keep thinking I should get out of there. So I feel like it seems like it's bad for my health. Like the torture, you know, walking around, never the end.
How long ago did your husband die?
6 weeks.
Oh,
And there's so many memories.
what's your name?
Annette.
Annette. I truly understand you wanting to do that. That's a very instinctive fight or flight, right?
I wanted him home.
I know.
But now
Okay.
I'm saying, what did I do to myself? The torture, I remember it.
The thing is, though, Annette, wherever you go, you will still have those memories.
Yeah, that's what I was told. You can see, I can't escape, you know.
Well, we can't escape grief. We cannot escape grief. If we've attached, we
Close the curtains in
we
the back
can't.
so I don't see the backyard or the garage.
And that's not truly living, is it? If you choose to move, once you've done your grief work, then it's going to be for different reasons. It's going to be for practical reasons. Because remember, if we give away anything or make any drastic moves while we're still acutely grieving, our emotions are going to stabilize and we may regret those decisions we made. So resist that temptation, that suffering. You've earned that suffering. I know that's a strange thing to say, but you're attached, you chose to have him at home. You gave him a gift.
But I wonder if he really knew he was home or not, you know, like.
I think they sense it. I think they sense it.
I don't think that I knew that he was gonna die. I was like in denial, you know.
You're very, very, very early in the process, Annette. Very early in the process. Kudos for you for even coming out tonight.
For me,
Good for you for even coming out tonight.
it was my daughter's suggestion.
But you know what? You know what? You listened to her.
I didn't want to, though.
I'm sure nobody else wanted to be here tonight either, because
I have a headache, she says. Well, you'll be all right, just go.
I'll vouch for you that you were here.
I thought she's pushy. You know what I mean? She's very insistent because she wants me to get better, but
You're going to, but it's not going to be in 7 weeks. It's not going to be in 8 weeks, all right? What happens, the people around all of you that see you in pain, they push you along because they don't want to see you in pain. As well as the fact that they don't understand that there's a naturalness to this process. And we're not comfortable sitting in the presence of other people's pain, emotional pain. If you had a broken leg, that'd be no problem. But your broken heart, I can't do anything about it. So I want you to get better sooner. I hope you got something out of tonight. It's still very early. You probably won't even remember a lot of the things that we talked about, but take a handout.
just unfair,
That's your feeling right now, yeah.
angry.
Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
Angry at God too, and then my parish priest said, you know, you gotta get over this anger stuff, you know. God, he says, Satan's gonna be working on you. I said, really? Satan's gonna work on me because I'm angry at God? How'd you get to that conclusion? He didn't like that too much.
No, I'm sure, because you were challenging him. Remember I talked about cultural and religious beliefs? How they can be in conflict with how you're really feeling? And you should really be given an opportunity to say whatever you need to say. And not be judged for what you're feeling.
I suggested I go speak to someone about my anger because I have my husband's ashes at home.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to bless them now because I'm too angry at God. So that should wait.
So I'm hearing some suggestions here. Maybe change parishes, change churches. I'll be with you in 1 second. Yeah. You might want to revisit that. Yes.
At least your daughter trusted you to come on your own. Mine drove me.
Anybody sitting beside you? You're talking?
Well, she's working, so
So she would have brought her here if she wasn't working. So let mom take the steps, do whatever she needs to do.
I'm learning.
Good. Yes, one moment. Back there, yep. So what this lady says is she texts her husband every day. Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. Habits are really difficult to break. Very difficult to break. So if you had been doing that for more than 3 months when he was alive, that's a habit. There will come a time where you won't pick up your phone to text him. And that's going to be a marker in your grief journey. And I see nothing wrong with that either. Somebody right here, and then I'll come back to you, Annette.
For people who have had a partner who has had a long illness or disability or something like that, do you have any comment about the difference between anticipatory grief and current grief once someone passes?
So for those who may not have heard, this guest would like to know the difference between, or what my thoughts are on anticipatory grief versus actual grief, because her husband died after a long illness. So I'll give you a little bit of history on anticipatory grief. It was coined around, the term was coined around World War II, when there was a study done on war brides, spouses who had sent their partners, their husbands, to war. What they found was that a lot of them started to withdraw started to break their attachment basically in preparation for their death, because that would be a protective factor. So if I don't love, if I don't need them so much, if they don't come back, it won't be as difficult. So there is this concept that we start our grief before that. Having said that, nothing really compensates for that person not being there. So it doesn't make the journey any quicker necessarily, but your emotions, your grief experiences that we talked about in the first couple of slides may not be as intense as I would see with somebody whose loved one died suddenly without any warning.
It's very different, and it's definitely like phase oriented, for sure.
Yes. But nothing prepares us for them physically never being. But you have some time, mental time to prepare. As opposed to, you're still going to have aftershock, right? The aftershocks. But think of somebody who gets that knock on the door, that telephone call, and in that moment, everything has changed. So it doesn't make your pain any less, but what we see with somebody who's experienced a sudden death is that they may be in a period of shock longer. So it takes, the whole process is then protracted, and their responses may be more intense. And the other thing is also, you probably are also bringing caregiver stress into your grief process, so don't ever diminish that. Caregiver stress. Even if you weren't caring for your loved one in the home, you were waiting. There was that anticipation. You're waiting. That's stressful. So that is also going to impact your grief process as well. You're welcome. Yes, sir.
It's been 3 months since I've lost my wife. She's sick for just over 3 years. Watched her progressively die of breast cancer. And it was always just her and I. We met later in life and didn't have kids, so we were, I'm sure everybody else also was extremely close. And to this lady's grief being only 6 weeks, I was at that point. Everything that we enjoyed doing, I didn't want to be around it. I wanted to sell it. I wanted to get rid of it. And something told me not to.
Good.
And I'm so glad I didn't, because it's all the things that we enjoyed together and having me. The one problem I have is finding a meeting to get up in the morning.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Finding a meeting to get up in the morning.
Yes.
Once I'm up and I'm into the routine and I keep busy and I talk to her, the day gradually gets bigger. But my mornings are going
Tough. Yep. Evening, nighttime, and mornings. Right? And usually weekends as well.
I just can't get out of bed. I just go, I have no meeting.
What's your name?
Wow.
Rod. Thank you for sharing, and I'm sure it not only helped Annette, but anybody else in that situation, that even in 3 months, you've seen progress. The meaning part, that takes more work. That's nothing tangible, right? That's nothing tangible. That's something that comes from inside, and we've each got to find our own meaning, our own purpose. So maybe one of the things to get you out of bed is to find that meaning, because you're here and you're saying you're looking for meaning. So to me, that's a strength. And no one else can give you that meaning. You need to find that on your own. Yeah, we don't read the fine print, do we? We don't read the fine print. Or if we did, we wouldn't believe it. Thank you for sharing. Annette, did you want to say something else?
Is it okay to talk out loud when you're walking?
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
is.
Yes. Is it okay to talk out loud when you're, yes, absolutely. Does he hear me? No. That I can't answer, because it depends on your beliefs.
You know, I want to know where heaven is and all that. You know, I get sick and tired of asking priests about, okay, where's heaven? And he's looking at you like I'm crazy, of course, which I probably am at this time. But he said, well, I don't know. It could be just a really happy, peaceful feeling. And I'm saying, that's not good enough for me.
Yep. So Annette, if you're not getting the support from this source, and I'm not telling you you've got to leave that church. We need to find support. We need to find support that makes sense to us, that lets us talk, that lets us cry, that lets us scream, that lets us protest, that helps us to explore. But ultimately, my definition of heaven can't be your definition of heaven. It may be, but I can't tell you. We all have to come up with a narrative, like you mentioned, Rod, you know, it's not fair, it's not right. We have to come up with a narrative that makes sense to us, not to our next door neighbor, not to our adult child, not to, you know, anybody else, but what makes sense to us.
Yeah, you hit it on the head because my pastor helped me a lot. And one thing that never came up was having our own. Not once.
We even talked about purgatory, and I said, I have to confess. You know.
Be talking about those things.
You know, I mean.
So you might be on a search to find not that you're searching for the answer you want to hear. You're searching for someone who allows you to express your feelings.
Well, you'd like to think that I will be with him.
And you can choose to believe
If
that.
I'm good enough.
Well, my belief system doesn't speak that way, right? Being good enough.
You're here.
Anything else? Yes.
Christine, you had said that you do counseling.
Yes.
But is there, because my husband passed during COVID, there really wasn't a lot of support out there, at least if there was,
Didn't know about it? Okay.
Right. So there's support groups for people who have lost spouses where you can talk about your feelings, and it's not more of informational, but maybe you could just talk about your feelings.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
How do you find those? And where are they?
Well, I know that Julian's House, which is a nonprofit organization that started 2 years ago, Julian's House is starting in-person support groups, specifically for widowers. Is that correct, Courtney? Canadian Mental Health has support groups. I did counseling throughout the pandemic. I didn't do it in person, but I did it online via video. So again, when you go to a support group, it has a lot of benefits, but it depends on what your needs are too.
Well, what I'm finding, for me, it's been almost 2 years. But I went from my husband's illness to my dad getting the exact same illness. And because now I'm widowed, I have apparently the most time to assist with my dad's illness, but family members forget that I walked that same journey with my husband. So all those feelings that I'm now getting with all the experiences with my dad.
It's taking it back too. Yep.
Right. And,
Right.
and they don't understand that because it's been 2 years and I should have moved on by now.
Right.
So I have a lot of feelings of anger and disappointment with my family and also friends because they feel like it's been 2 years and I should move on. But I didn't know that there was a time on grief.
There isn't, but again, in our culture, we'd like hurry up and get better.
Right.
Okay, so there's an assumption that you don't have your partner anymore, so now you've got time. That's unfair.
Right.
That's not right, and you're still grieving. You're still going through the process. So it wasn't only your father. You share him with your siblings. So that's where boundaries are really important. Okay, and speaking up for yourself. And using your voice and saying, no, you know, that's not fair. I can't, because think about it, if it was a broken bone, we wouldn't have any problem saying, no, I can't help out. I'm not able to do it. So we have to regard ourselves in the same way with a broken heart. I mean, if I walked in here and I didn't know this was a bereavement presentation, none of you look like you're grieving. Right? We don't have signs that says my heart's broken. So we do have to speak up for ourselves to get our needs met. Because it's very rare that other people will be there for you in that way.
Well, my circle has gotten a lot smaller.
Circles get smaller. But it's not the quantity, it's the quality. Always the quality. I'll be right with you, Rod. Yes.
I just wanted to say, if you're looking for a support group, be very, very careful if you go online.
Yes.
There's many
Yes.
support groups out there that are not professionals, not one in a group. Some of them are very overbearing, and they're going to tell you when you should stop grieving, when you should get rid of this clothes, when you should sell your house, when you should stay away from them. If you can't tap into Christine and Canadian Mental Health, there are reliable groups out there, but don't just join up to something online because they're...
Yeah, you make a good point. We say this in grief, don't shit on anybody, okay? Because we're very quick with that. And I absolutely agree. You've got to make sure that anything online is monitored and moderated by a professional, and what their position is on grief. Is it the stages? In which case I'd run away from it because there's no stages. Is it understanding that this is a process, it takes time? C.S. Lewis says it's like grass growing. One day you realize, that it's grown. So it's very gradual, there's no timeline, and you do have to be careful when you get online. If you decide to join anything, any kind of form like that. Absolutely. Good point. Really good point. Yes, sir. Rod?
I was just going to add to her point that unfortunately we've run into the same issues, and the only people that seem to connect are ones that have been through it. The ones that haven't have no idea. They shouldn't even speak.
It's when you think about it, it's very, very difficult to experience, to understand when you haven't experienced. I mean, this was just an hour and a half of what you're experiencing every day, every moment. It's so subtle and it's so obvious. Unless you've lived it, there's absolutely no way of knowing. I'm not a bereaved spouse. I am a bereaved mother, and I know something about the process, but I can't say to you, I know what it feels like. All I can say is from my experience and my training, this is what I know.
But you don't judge.
I should not judge at all.
That's my point.
Oh, absolutely not. So figure out, Alan Wilfeld talks about a rule of thirds. You can divide the people that you know and come into your life into one of three groups. The people who will support you, will not judge you, will walk with you, okay? Who'll hold your hand, who'll give you a little push when you need it, who'll let you cry, who'll let you scream. 1/3 of the people will disappear from your life, not literally. And 1/3 of the people will push and pull you through the process because they're uncomfortable with your pain. Figure out who's in what group and try to stay really close to the first group. Sometimes relatives are in the other two groups, so be mindful of that. And what I would suggest then is you just monitor, the time, the exposure to people in groups 2 and 3. And people can move from one group to another. And again, it's not number, it's quality. Quality of people in your circle. Yes.
Depending on the person's circumstance, hospice has started groups in person again.
Yes, that's right.
I'm just finishing up the first one done since COVID and doing some leaving time. Did you follow Alan Wolfhead and the Green Book? I was just trying to look up the name. I'm so forgetful. But, I mean, it's a lot to process, but it is supportive, and you're with people that have lost someone to a serious illness, and that they are starting that.
Thanks, Natalie. So hospice is starting in person as well. Right. Now, it also depends on how your spouse died. So if you go to a hospice, for example, and your spouse died a sudden death, you might not feel that you're getting all the connection you want. But on the other hand, it might be the place where you just slide in and you feel that you're home. These people get it. These people get me. But I also know that hospice groups are moderated by professionals. And Julian's house is, and so is CMHA. And if you do happen to go to a group that's run by the faith community, your faith community, again, find out about who the leader is. Find out what their philosophy is. Do they present the, is their model based on the stages framework, which is really outdated. So grief is more like this. It's more fluid, it's more dynamic. Thank you so much for your participation. Again, I wish you all the very best in your grief journeys. Drive home safely.